Ladies and gentlemen, we've got another update on the tariff wars going on right now. China potentially blinking themselves. Now, we know over the past few weeks, Trump has revised some things. There was talk about removing tariffs, or not removing them, I should say, bringing them down to 20%, which is the baseline tariff on electronics, on semiconductors. Well, now China seemingly is returning the favor. And we know China, there's a lot of stoicism within them. They are very steadfast on appearing strong up against the United States. They think that because, in comparison to 2017, 2018, when Trump levied the first tariffs on China, they do have less of a reliance on the U.S. economy than they did in 2018, 2019. They think that they can weather the storm, and they're not afraid to have their citizens suffer at least a little bit if it means they appear stronger up against another global superpower like the United States. They've taken their aim at the United States. They want to pass us in terms of the number one overall global dominant force within the world. But we've got an update here, and we understand the dynamics when it comes to the United States and China. It is a lot more complicated, but you can simplify it down to the idea of, yes, initially tariffs will, especially if it's a tariff war and a trade war, they will hurt both countries, but over time, they will hurt China significantly more. The Chinese are trying to wait Trump out, and they think there's going to be a lot of domestic pressure on Trump to blink first, even though Trump should have the leverage over China because we have such a crazy deficit, meaning their economy, to a degree, is built off of the United States consumer base and access to it. And if they don't have access to it, it's going to be a problem. Now, we have 145% tariffs on them on most things. They have 125% tariffs on us. This was escalation, but you can see China's government is considering suspending its 125% tariff on some U.S. imports. People familiar with the matter says, as the economic costs of the tit-for-tat trade war weighs heavily on certain industries. So it would be a strategic removal for the Chinese, because when you're dealing with a trade war, initially, and this is why it's so hard to discuss this with people, especially with Trump haters, they're going to say, well, tariffs are terrible. Look at what's happening. Well, the payoff for tariffs does not come within the first 2, 3, 4 months they're in place. Certainly, we could get some of these deals negotiated, and Trump has talked about it as he is going to Pope Francis's funeral. There's a lot of things lined up behind the scenes when it comes to talking to a bunch of countries. Now Trump's come out and said talks with Iran are looking better and better. The Russia-Ukraine situation we've been monitoring, that's potentially coming to a head to where maybe we'll get some movement on a ceasefire and a peace deal. Trump's been really, really vocal about getting that solved, or at least moving it forward rather than where we were. But let's get back to this. You're talking about removing some tariffs on industries that are getting just completely crushed when it comes to China now being forced, and their companies being forced to pay massive tariffs against U.S. imports coming in. And they're saying, well, we've got industries that are getting destroyed, kind of like what Trump did with the semiconductors. It's a similar thing, so you can understand it. But the point here, if you are Trump, it's to focus on the leverage and to also focus on, and this is kind of the proxy situation when it comes to the overall trade war just between the United States and China, it's the other countries. Because Trump implemented the Liberation Day, which called out every country the United States does trade with, and then brought it down to 10% because of the yield spiking. Now we're at a point to where the United States and China are jousting for these other countries. And China is telling the other countries, do not make a deal with the United States right now, because they know if we're able to make all of these deals before we talk to the Chinese, they're going to lose all of their leverage. And we're going to isolate China to the point of no return in terms of them being forced to capitulate to our demands when it comes to, and I think it would be best for both countries for China to eliminate their trade surplus to a degree and not have an over-reliance on the U.S. consumer base. We're seeing the results of it right now. They're not too happy about it, but you can see which countries will the U.S. agree to trade deals with before July. Japan is up to an 84%. Israel, India, Vietnam, South Korea, Argentina, the UK, the EU, Mexico and China is a little bit different because it's a separate agreement, the North American trade agreement that might be renegotiated after the Canadian election happening on Monday. And then there's other countries here as well. I think there's, oh yeah, China's right here at 42%. The point of this is if we can come to agreements with these other countries, because we've heard the rumors that China is threatening other countries to not make agreements with the United States because they want to control some of the leverage, and it's a trade war. China is going to have a certain amount of leverage. They're not a complete pushover. It's not like they're completely 1000% reliant on the United States. They have other countries they can trade with. But those countries are also, to a degree, being taken advantage of by the Chinese and their labor practices and their mass production and them copying certain products. All of this goes hand in hand. And that's why when we're negotiating with these other countries, there's stipulations to where if you do import products from China and then export them to the United States, there will be either a tariff on those products, or we're going to make it to where you're not allowed to do that, or it's going to be a lot harder to do that in negotiations. That's what I would imagine. But right now we have the United States, you could argue, blinking a little bit with the semiconductor tariff halt, and now you have the Chinese doing the exact same thing. Authorities are considering removing the additional levies for medical equipment and some industrial chemicals like ethane, the people said, not asking to be identified, discussing private deliberations. Also, plane leases, some other things. So select industries, select sectors they're looking to remove, which because they're just getting crushed by it when you're talking about imports into Canada, or excuse me, imports into China being tariffed at 125% rate. So there is that. And then we also do have a little bit of a rebound in terms of the overall markets. By the way, I think the GDP comes out today, so we're going to have to see that. But the markets are positive the past week. You've got Microsoft up around 5%, Nvidia up 6%, Apple up 5%, Amazon up 7.5%, Tesla back up. Where is it trading? $250 right now. Google up 7.5%, Meta up 7.5% as well. And this is one of those things to where it's like, you like this stabilization within the market, even in unknowing times, because we still have no clue what's going to happen with this trade war. We think there are going to be deals. Trump says behind the scenes there's deals. Now we've got this little jousting match between Trump and the CCP, where China says, no, there's been no negotiations. Trump says negotiations are ongoing. We'll see what happens in terms of that. China is maintaining this positive public posture, if you will, in terms of the way they're articulating their talking points. They're saying, well, we will negotiate with the United States if the United States is fair to us. We did not levy this trade war, they did. And they're trying to create this narrative that, well, we're standing tall, we're not giving in to the United States. Well, I mean, you are removing some of your tariffs, it looks like, on certain industries. And it's a situation to where both of these countries can handle the tariffs they place on each other, at least at this point, for a certain amount of time. The thing about it is, and this was the exact same thing with Canada. Canada's a different story in terms of the size of the economy with China and Canada, but just in terms of the longer this lasts, like that's why you saw Canada and their premiers originally come out and say, oh, we're going to hit Trump back. We can do this. They wanted to put immediate pressure on Trump so domestically he would feel the heat. And the citizens of the United States would say, no, we don't want to do this. It's not worth it. When in reality, if you just get into a trade war with Canada, you're going to win 100 times out of 100. With China, you would imagine the United States would win. It probably would take a lot longer. And that's where it becomes this analysis that you do, because they know the way we work in terms of the citizens are a lot more vocal in the United States, and we tend to have more say in our system. People are not going to be happy in the United States. The CCP is looking at this and saying, well, yes, we might have some downturn. And also they can just say, Trump got into this trade war. He's the aggressor. We're just responding. We want to appear strong. And we think that compared to 2017, 2018, we have less of a reliance on the U.S. economy, although they still do have certainly a major reliance on us, considering the $3 billion deficit that we have with China. So there's a number of things to look at when it comes to this. Now, will the deal with China happen first? I would say if you're Trump, no, you don't want it to happen first. You want to get more leverage over China by agreeing to deals with these other countries, which could isolate China, especially when it comes to the stipulations within those deals. If they make it to where you cannot import products from China and then export them to the United States, at least not with things that are out of reason. I mean, sometimes that happens in trade. It's just the reality, depending on the product. But ideally, we would want to nip that in the bud. And that's something that happened under Trump's first term. That's how China was able to skirt around some tariffs. But overall tariffs, it's a long-term gain. That's why people say originally, oh, nobody wins. Well, eventually the United States will win if we keep these tariffs on and if we kickstart domestic production. Now you can say, well, Trump should do it strategically. This is not the way to go about it. Again, the other thing to look at is the inflation. Trump has started this trade war. And what did we see? We saw in the past, and listen, I'll just go to it. It is what it is. You take a look at the past 3 months, everything is down. Nvidia is down a quarter. Microsoft down 13%, Apple down 7%. You might say, well, this is negative. This is terrible. And for older folks with their 401ks, yes, it is bad. And I'm not trying to gaslight people and say, well, this is great. And, oh, the stock market doesn't matter, because this is how normies judge an economy. I get it. And it's been down. Absolutely. There's really good byproducts that come from this, like a lower inflation rate, which is what we've seen with core inflation down to 2.4%, with true inflation down to 1.36%, with the energy sector down, with crude oil trading anywhere from $61 to $65 per barrel, which is a sweet spot where we want it, maybe even under $60. And they say, well, that causes a recession and all this. Well, I mean, we'll see with the GDP. I don't know what it is. I haven't seen the reading on it. But the point of it is there are things that happen as a product of this turmoil. And one of the things is lower inflation. What does lower inflation create? Lower interest rates. Why do we need lower interest rates? Well, lower interest rates means hopefully an economic boom. But on top of that, it enables us to refinance a ton of debt, possibly $6 trillion worth of our debt in 2026 at 2% interest rates. And this is all going to be explained by Trump before the midterms. Like mid-2026 is all be explained. We're going to have a full set, and we'll see what happens, because I don't know exactly what's going to happen with the trade war. You can't really predict it. I would say we're going to start making deals with these countries. Hopefully China gets very angry about that. That's fine. Then we'll make a deal with the Chinese sometimes in the summer. It'll probably be stipulated to where it'll be a multi-stage trade deal, because it's going to be intricate and it's going to be very detailed. But the original baseline trade deal will probably happen in June or July with China after the other deals are done. How long will the other deals take? People are saying it's going to be, I mean, Trump put that 90-day window, and apparently it's been 15 days. I saw in a tweet. So it's been 15 days out of the 90. Really, the 90-day window is just, it's an arbitrary, artificial deadline that you put in place to try and threaten countries. And maybe my thought is that after 90 days, Trump could just extend the deadline if he wanted to. It depends the situation we're in. If we have trade deals with all these countries, and then there's one singular country that's treating us badly, maybe Trump will just say, well, the 90 days are up. We're putting the tariff back to what it was. It was 96% on Vietnam, 80% on some of these countries. It's based off the deficit, not necessarily reciprocal. But that's what I could see Trump doing. So the point of this is, when you're talking about the economy, when you're talking about tariffs, it is a long game. You do have to dig in a little bit. China is digging in. They are removing some of theirs, but Trump also brought some of ours down. So this is a little tit for tat back and forth. China is not going to fold. That's the reality. What we can hope to do is agree to trade deals with all of these other countries. China doesn't want that. They're threatening the other countries, saying, don't do a trade deal right now with the United States. We do the deals, and then we can position ourselves more favorably to negotiate with China. And Trump can swing it as a win. But I'm just telling everyone right now, the chances of Trump completely just getting this amazing, perfect deal with China is unlikely, just the way they operate. They've got a big enough economy to absorb whatever hit that they take, even though that we will be in a better position than they will. They are trying to call Trump's bluff and say, well, you're not going to do this for 2 or 3 years because you cannot afford it. You have midterms. You have the 2028 election. You know, people say, oh, Trump 2028. Well, it's going to be Vance. It's going to be a Republican. And that's going to fall on whatever Republican it is, the economy is, and how good it is, especially if it's Vance, because he's a part of this administration. So what I will say overall is, you have the United States and China, the two superpowers. They both can deal with short-term economic turmoil. China, because of the way their political system is set up, can potentially deal with a longer period of downturn. That doesn't mean China is going to beat us in this trade war, especially if we're able to isolate them with negotiations with other countries. So I think that's the goal right now. And then we do some type of trade deal with China, and there's give and take with it. But the point of it is, when it comes to a trade deal with China, they're so unfair in terms of trade. If you're looking to, oh, give us this, give us that. I mean, we know that Trump is going to bring the tariffs down against China. That's what happens in negotiations. How are we going to negotiate with the Chinese and say, oh yeah, we're going to keep the 145% tariff. You guys got to give us X, Y, and Z. Lower your surplus with us, and also make our products more competitive. And you can't steal our products, and you can't you put all these stipulations on it. You have to, during negotiations, you're going to lower the tariff against China. Trump said that, and then they said, oh, he's caving in. No, what Trump was saying, the only way Trump caves in is if he lowers substantial tariffs before negotiations. That's it. That's what China's doing right now. And then they said, well, Trump did it. Well, no, that was 25% of the imports into the United States that he maybe lowered, although I don't even know if he did, but they were saying electronics and semiconductors and things like that. That's 25% of the imports. So 75% of the imports from China are still being tariffed at 145% rate. And this is kind of what China is doing now. They're seeing this and they're saying, well, we have 125% tariffs against the United States. Our companies are getting crushed. There's essential stuff we bring in and trade from the US, so we have to lower it in certain sectors. So they're responding by doing it. So listen, you've got these two superpowers. If we can isolate the Chinese, it will work out. We will get a good deal. We will get an agreement for China to lower their surplus. They should want to do it anyways, to not have an over-reliance on the U.S. Consumer base, because it's unhealthy. And they've been putting in steps the past 4 or 5 years to do that. But now it's like times 10 because of this trade war. So guys, make sure you like this video down below. But that's going to do it for this one. And also follow me on X. Link to that's always in the description.